Hey everybody, welcome back. This month in the strength class, you might have noticed that we did Surya Namaskar at the beginning, which is the sun salute. And we don't do Surya Namaskar in a lot of our classes, but Surya Namaskar is a really interesting phenomenon of modern yoga, and it has a really interesting history, like how it has become what it is, and then how it made its way into modern yoga. So we thought we'd take the opportunity today to just talk about like some of the places where Surya Namaskar came from and how it turned into what you might know today as a really important part of modern yoga, especially any flowing styles or Ashtanga Vinyasa yoga style. Okay, so the first thing about Surya Namaskar is that half of it comes from a wrestling movement called a dand. There are many of them. So there are like different kinds of dands, and there are, they all have different movements. Sort of like in Vinyasa yoga, people talk about different vinyasas. More than 100 years ago, there were these dands that people do, these little tiny fluid exercises, and this one dand was really common in wrestling because it takes your shoulders through a huge range of motion and it puts your body's weight on your shoulders. So you would start up like this, and then you would bend down, and then you would put your shoulders like this, and then you put your shoulders like this. And you do this over and over again. And this was one of the dands. Now you might recognize that sort of as an upward facing dog and a downward facing dog movement. Okay. The wrestlers would also do it the other way, which is much harder to do, which is you would come forward and then bend down and stick your butt in the air and push yourself up. So you can see that those are really good for developing shoulder strength and shoulder control, and they would be really useful for wrestlers. Okay, so that is one piece that made its way into the modern Surya Namaskar. The other piece is another dand, but it's like the jumping back motion. Okay, so where you would start standing and you put your hands on the floor and then you jump back and then you jump forward and then you stand up. So you do this, like this. Nowadays, that it's kind of like a precursor to the burpee, right? Stand up, like so. Gets your heart rate up, gets your body temperature up, and again, it puts weight in your arms and it has you transition through some big movements. And so when you put positions like these together, you start to get something that resembles modern Surya Namaskar. Now, modern Surya Namaskar actually leapt forward in the 1920s by a prince near Pune, and so the first Surya Namaskar looks a lot like what we did in the class. Okay, there's no backward bend. You just start with your hands at your chest like this, and then you fold forward, and then you step back with one leg and put your knee on the floor, and then you step back into like a plank, and then you lower down onto your chest and chin. Then you do a back bend, then into the down dog kind of thing where your butt goes in the air. Then you step forward, and stand up. Just like this. I'll do that again. So you inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, and inhale. Okay, so that's kind of like the first known modern Surya Namaskar in the 1920s. That man, whose name was Bhavanarao Pant Pratinidhi, his son, a few decades later, also adapted it again, and he put another, like a down dog in the middle there, where you would still start with your hands at your chest. You bend forward, you step back with one leg, but then here he added like a down dog thing, where you step back, but you come into this position, and then you come down onto chest and chin. Go back to the butt in the air, step forward, and come up. So that's one example of a slight variation on Surya Namaskar. And then, of course, at the Mysore Palace in the south of India, where Krishnamacharya really innovated Surya Namaskar into yoga practice, they were a lot more interested in the vigorous movements, and so the jumping stuff got more integrated as opposed to the stepping, right? Whereas perhaps the earliest modern Surya Namaskar had a step back. At the Mysore Palace, they were more interested in the vigorous jump, and so they would put their hands on the floor and they would jump back. And then either you put the knees on the floor, or they even made it more vigorous by keeping the plank and lowering down without putting your knees on the floor, and then going through those motions and jumping forward. Okay, so that's an example of how at the Mysore Palace they took the Surya Namaskar that was gaining popularity and they made it even more vigorous, where they added a push-up in and a couple jumps. And then finally, in the northeast, in Calcutta at the Ghosh's College, where we mostly learned yoga, Surya Namaskar didn't make it till a little bit later, and they were a lot less interested in the jumping aspects and more interested in the controlled aspects. And so the Surya Namaskar took on a slightly different tone and shape again. Okay? So in the Ghosh Surya Namaskar, you start with a back bend, because in Calcutta they're far more interested in moving the spine specifically. So you start with a back bend, then you do hands on the floor, and then here's an interesting, unique characteristic. You squat down and you put your head on your knees. And then again, another unique position. You step back, but you keep the head on the knees. And then you look up. We'll recognize that position. You step back. There's no down dog or up dog in this one. You just do a push-up. And then you step forward. We recognize this. Put the head back on the knee. And then you squat down again. Put the head on the knees. Straighten the legs. And stand up. So you see that when the Surya Namaskar went to Calcutta, they adjusted it again to suit their interests and their purposes, which in this case were a lot more based on muscle control and bending the spine, which was not nearly as interesting to the people in the South, who were more interested in the vigorous activity of the jumping and being on the arms. So that's just a little bit of insight into the history and development of Surya Namaskar. There is no quintessential, perfect, correct Surya Namaskar. There are lots of different ones, as we've looked at 3 or 4 of them here today. Surya Namaskar is always changing. So that's enough for today. We'll see you guys next time.